When Marcus's ex-girlfriend stood up at our wedding reception and announced that he had proposed to her first, the entire room went silent. What she did not know was that I owned Luminaire Diamonds, the company Marcus owed $73,000 to for the engagement ring he had bought me on credit he could not afford. I smiled, walked to the microphone, and said the words that would change everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Elena Vasquez and I am 34 years old. Until 3 days ago, I believed I had built the perfect life through careful planning and relentless work. I am the founder and CEO of Luminaire Diamonds, a boutique jewelry company specializing in ethically sourced engagement rings and custom designs. What started 8 years ago as a small online operation run from my studio apartment had grown into a multi-million-dollar business with a flagship showroom in the jewelry district and a client list that included celebrities, business executives, and people who wanted something extraordinary to mark the most important commitment of their lives. I built Luminaire from nothing. My parents immigrated from Colombia when I was 6 years old, and I grew up watching them work multiple jobs to provide stability my father never had in his childhood. My mother cleaned offices at night while working as a seamstress during the day. My father drove a delivery truck and did construction work on weekends. They taught me that security came from ownership, from building something that could not be taken away by an employer's whim or an economic downturn. They taught me to value craftsmanship and integrity, to never cut corners or compromise quality for short-term profit. Those lessons became the foundation of everything I built. I studied business and design at a state university, working full-time to avoid student loans while my classmates partied and networked, and built the social connections that would later open professional doors. I did not have time for that network building. I had shifts at 3 different retail jobs, class schedules optimized to maximize credit hours per semester, and a relentless determination to graduate without debt. I finished in 3 years instead of 4 summa cum laude, with a portfolio of jewelry designs I had been developing since my sophomore year. The jewelry industry is notoriously difficult to break into without family connections or significant capital. I had neither. What I had was a laptop, a credit card with a $3,000 limit, and an understanding that the engagement ring market was undergoing fundamental transformation. Millennials wanted ethical sourcing. They wanted transparency about where their diamonds came from and who benefited from their purchase. They wanted unique designs that reflected their actual aesthetic preferences, rather than whatever De Beers had decided to market that year. I saw an opportunity in that gap between what traditional jewelers offered and what younger customers actually wanted. I started small. I designed rings digitally and partnered with a small manufacturer who would produce pieces on consignment. I built a website that told the story behind each stone, documenting the mine origin and the artisans involved in cutting and setting. I priced everything transparently, showing customers exactly what they were paying for and what margin I needed to sustain the business. It was revolutionary in an industry built on opacity and artificial scarcity. The first year, I made $47,000 in revenue and kept $18,000 as salary. I lived in a studio apartment with furniture from thrift stores and ate rice and beans more nights than I care to remember. But the business grew. Customers appreciated the transparency and the craftsmanship. They told their friends. I got featured in a bridal magazine article about ethical engagement rings. Revenue doubled, then tripled. By year 3, I needed a physical showroom. Banks were reluctant to lend to a young woman with a relatively new business and no collateral beyond inventory. I bootstrapped the expansion by taking no salary for 8 months, living off savings and credit cards, pouring every dollar back into building out a small retail space in a secondary location in the jewelry district. The lease was expensive and the neighborhood was grittier than I wanted, but it gave me legitimacy. Customers could see the rings in person. I could meet with them face to face, understand their vision, create custom pieces that reflected their unique story. Year 5 brought the breakthrough. A tech entrepreneur bought a custom ring for his girlfriend's proposal at a destination wedding that got covered extensively on social media. The ring was featured in multiple photos and articles. Within a week, I received 200 inquiry emails. I hired my first full-time employee, then a second, then a third. I moved to a better location with higher foot traffic and more prestigious neighboring businesses. Revenue crossed $2 million. I finally paid myself a salary that reflected my actual contribution rather than just survival minimums. By year 8, Luminaire Diamonds had established itself as the destination for customers who wanted something beyond the traditional jewelry store experience. We offered complete transparency on sourcing, detailed documentation on each stone's origin and characteristics, custom design services that involved genuine collaboration rather than just selecting from existing templates, and financing options for customers who wanted quality but needed to spread payments over time. That financing program would later become the source of my most painful discovery. I implemented the financing program in year 6, partnering with a third-party lender who would extend credit to qualified customers while Luminaire received payment upfront. It worked well for 2 years until the lender increased their fees to a level that made the program unprofitable for us. I made the decision to bring financing in-house. Luminaire would extend credit directly, assuming the risk but keeping the interest income and maintaining complete control over the customer experience. My accountant warned me about the additional complexity and risk. My attorney insisted on ironclad contracts with clear remedies for non-payment. I proceeded anyway, confident that our customer vetting process would minimize defaults. That decision to bring financing in-house meant that I had direct access to detailed financial information about every customer who bought on credit. I could see their credit scores, their income documentation, their payment history, their outstanding balances. It was this access, this window into financial reality that most business owners never see about their customers, that would eventually destroy the life I thought I was building. I met Marcus Reeves at a charity fundraiser 2 years ago. The event benefited a nonprofit providing business microloans to immigrant entrepreneurs, a cause deeply personal to me given my parents' experience. Marcus was there representing his employer, a commercial real estate development firm that had donated a significant sponsorship. He approached me at the reception following the main program, introduced himself, and complimented my work with a specificity that suggested he had actually researched Luminaire rather than just making conversation. Marcus was attractive in a way that felt effortless. He was tall with an athletic build maintained through regular gym sessions and recreational basketball. He had dark hair always precisely styled, a smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room, and a confidence that came from a lifetime of things working out easily for him. He wore his success comfortably, expensive watch and tailored suit and leather shoes that probably cost more than my first month's inventory. We talked for nearly an hour that first night. He asked thoughtful questions about building Luminaire, about the challenges of scaling a business, about my vision for future growth. He shared stories about his work in commercial real estate, the complexity of putting together development deals, the satisfaction of seeing empty lots transform into spaces that served communities. He made me laugh. He listened more than he talked, a rare quality that made him immediately likable. When he asked for my number at the end of the evening, I gave it to him without hesitation. Our first date was dinner at an upscale Italian restaurant in a neighborhood I rarely visited because the prices made me uncomfortable despite my business success. Marcus insisted on paying, waving away my attempt to split the check with a casual generosity that suggested money was not something he thought about carefully. We talked about our childhoods, our families, our different paths to professional success. He came from upper-middle-class stability, parents who were both attorneys, private schools and tennis lessons and college application consultants. His path had been smoother than mine, cushioned by family resources and connections, but he seemed genuinely impressed by what I had built from nothing. The relationship developed quickly. Within 3 months, we were spending most weekends together. Within 6 months, he had a key to my apartment and kept clothes in my closet. Within 9 months, he was talking about our future together with a certainty that felt both thrilling and slightly overwhelming. He talked about the house we would buy, the trips we would take, the life we would build together. He made it sound inevitable, like our future was already written, and we were just waiting for the timeline to catch up. Marcus proposed on a Saturday morning at the Botanical Gardens. It was early autumn, the weather perfect, the gardens full of late-blooming flowers. We were walking through the rose garden when he stopped at a fountain, pulled out a small velvet box, and dropped to one knee. The ring was from Luminaire, he explained with a grin. He had worked with my lead designer Rebecca to create something he knew I would love. It was platinum with a 2-carat emerald-cut diamond, flanked by smaller stones, elegant and classic with just enough distinctive detail to feel personal. I said yes immediately, overcome with emotion and surprise and the sheer romance of the moment. He slipped the ring on my finger right there beside the fountain while other garden visitors applauded and took photos. We celebrated with champagne at a restaurant overlooking the city, making calls to family and friends, starting the process of sharing our happiness with everyone in our lives. What I did not know in that moment, what I would not discover until weeks later, was that Marcus had financed the ring through Luminaire's in-house credit program. He had purchased a ring costing $68,000 with zero down payment and a 5-year repayment plan at 8% interest. The total amount he would owe over the life of the loan was $93,000. He had made the first payment on time, then the second payment arrived 15 days late with a late fee. The third payment never came at all. I did not review every financing account personally. That would have been impossible given the volume. My finance manager handled the day-to-day operations, flagging problems and managing collections. But 3 months after Marcus proposed, she brought a file to my office that made my blood go cold. Her name was Patricia, a woman in her 50s with 20 years of experience in consumer lending and a no-nonsense approach to financial management. She knocked on my office door late on a Wednesday afternoon, holding a physical file folder instead of just sending an email, which immediately signaled something serious. "We need to talk about an account," she said, closing the door behind her. I wanted to handle this in person because of the sensitivity. I gestured for her to sit. Patricia was not someone who manufactured drama or brought me problems without having already attempted solutions. If she was in my office with a closed door, the situation was genuinely problematic. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "We have a customer who is 3 months delinquent on a significant balance," she began. "Total outstanding is now $73,000 including late fees and interest. We have sent multiple notices. We have called repeatedly. The phone number goes straight to voicemail. The email address bounces back. We cannot locate the customer." My stomach tightened. $73,000 was a significant default, large enough to impact our quarterly numbers and raise questions from our accountant. What do we know about the customer? Did they provide false information on the application? Patricia opened the folder and slid it across my desk. Everything checked out at the time. Good credit score. Income documentation verified. Employment confirmed. But now 3 months delinquent and completely unreachable. I looked down at the file. The name at the top of the credit application was Marcus Reeves. The office seemed to tilt. I stared at the name, convinced I was misreading it, that this was some terrible coincidence, that there must be another Marcus Reeves who happened to buy a ring from my company. But then I saw the purchase details. Platinum setting. 2-carat emerald cut diamond. Custom design consultation with Rebecca. Purchase date 3 weeks before Marcus proposed to me. Patricia was watching my face carefully. "Elena, I did not make the connection until I pulled the full file. I am so sorry. I had no idea." I could not speak. My throat had closed completely. I was staring at documentation showing that my fiancé had purchased my engagement ring on credit. He apparently could not afford and was now in default on a loan from my own company. The ring currently sitting on my finger represented $73,000 in bad debt that I would have to write off or pursue through collections. "What do you need from me?" I finally managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. Patricia's expression was sympathetic but professional. "We need to decide how to proceed. Legally, this is a standard default. We have remedies available through the contract. We can continue attempting contact. We can refer to collections. We can pursue legal action. But given your personal relationship with the debtor, you need to decide how you want to handle this." I told Patricia I would review the file and get back to her. After she left, I sat alone in my office staring at the documents spread across my desk. The credit application showed Marcus's income as $175,000 annually, high enough to support the monthly payments comfortably. But clearly something had changed. Or perhaps nothing had changed, and he had simply never intended to make the payments, gambling that his personal relationship with me would protect him from consequences. I thought about the past year with Marcus. the expensive dinners he always insisted on paying for, the weekend trips to resort destinations, the designer clothes and luxury accessories. I had assumed he earned enough to support that lifestyle comfortably. It had never occurred to me to question whether his spending matched his actual financial capacity rather than his desired image. I went home that evening in a daze. Marcus was already there, having let himself in with his key. He was in the kitchen cooking dinner, something he did occasionally that always felt like a generous gesture since I typically worked longer hours. He smiled when I walked in, kissed me hello, asked about my day in the casual way that couples do when they have established comfortable routines. I could not bring myself to confront him immediately. I needed time to think, to decide how to approach this, to understand the full scope of what was happening. I smiled and said work had been stressful. I sat at the counter drinking the wine he poured and watched him cook, studying him as though I was seeing him clearly for the first time. Over the following days, I began noticing things I had previously overlooked or explained away. Marcus's vagueness about his finances. The way he changed the subject when I mentioned saving for a down payment on a house. His reluctance to discuss wedding budgets or timeline despite being the one who had proposed. The expensive lifestyle maintained through means I had assumed were legitimate earnings but now suspected might be credit cards and loans, and the kind of financial house of cards that eventually collapses. I needed to know the full truth before deciding how to proceed. I reached out to a friend who worked in financial services and asked a hypothetical question about checking someone's credit report. She explained the legal constraints but also mentioned that there were ways to get general information about someone's financial health, if you knew where to look. Public records, court filings, bankruptcy databases. I spent an evening searching. What I found was devastating. Marcus had been sued twice in the past 3 years by creditors seeking payment on defaulted loans. He had a judgment against him from a credit card company for $17,000. He had filed for bankruptcy 7 years ago, before I met him, discharging more than $100,000 in unsecured debt. The man who presented himself as financially successful, who insisted on paying for expensive dinners and wore designer clothes and drove a luxury car, was drowning in debt and apparently handling it by simply not paying his obligations. I sat in my apartment late that night, my laptop open to court records documenting Marcus's financial irresponsibility, and felt the foundations of my life cracking. I had built a business on transparency and integrity. I had built a life on careful financial planning and honest dealing. And I had somehow allowed myself to become engaged to a man who apparently operated according to completely opposite principles. The wedding was scheduled for 8 weeks away. We had booked a venue, hired a caterer, sent save-the-date cards. My parents had begun planning their travel from Florida. Marcus's family was arranging flights from various cities. I had a dress being altered to fit perfectly. We had registered for gifts. We had compiled a guest list of 160 people who would travel from across the country to celebrate our marriage. And I had absolutely no idea what to do. I could confront Marcus privately, demand explanation, give him opportunity to make this right. I could cancel the wedding, end the relationship, pursue the debt through normal collection processes. I could pretend I had never learned any of this, move forward with the wedding, hope that marriage would somehow transform him into someone financially responsible. Each option felt impossible. Each option felt like it would destroy some essential part of myself. I called my sister Isabella the next morning. She lived 3 hours away with her husband and 2 children, working as a physician's assistant while raising a family. We had always been close despite the distance, and she was one of the few people I trusted completely. "I need to tell you something," I said when she answered, my voice already breaking, "and I need you not to judge me for not seeing it sooner." I told her everything. The defaulted loan, the public records, the pattern of financial irresponsibility hidden behind an expensive facade. Isabella listened without interrupting, letting me get through the entire story before responding. "What do you want to do?" she finally asked. "I do not know," I admitted. Part of me wants to confront him, to give him a chance to explain. Part of me wants to run as far away as possible. Part of me wants to pretend I never found any of this and just hope it works out somehow. Which part sounds most like the Elena who built a multimillion-dollar business by making hard decisions and refusing to compromise her integrity? Isabella asked gently. Her question cut through all my confusion and landed with devastating clarity. I knew what I needed to do. I had known from the moment Patricia placed that file on my desk. I just had not wanted to accept it. I spent the next week documenting everything. I made copies of all the financial records I had access to. I reviewed the loan agreement Marcus had signed. I consulted with my attorney about my options and obligations. I talked to Patricia about the business implications. I prepared myself emotionally for what I knew would be one of the hardest conversations of my life. But before I could initiate that conversation, before I could take control of the situation and address it on my terms, everything exploded in the most public and humiliating way possible at our wedding reception. And the person who lit the fuse was someone I had never even heard Marcus mention. His ex-girlfriend, Vanessa. The wedding reception was held at the Riverside Estate, a historic mansion overlooking the water that had been converted into an event venue. Marcus and I had toured 6 different locations before settling on this one, attracted by its combination of elegant architecture and natural beauty. The ballroom featured floor-to-ceiling windows that flooded the space with natural light during the day and provided a dramatic backdrop of the illuminated city skyline at night. Crystal chandeliers hung from ornate ceiling medallions. The original hardwood floors had been restored to gleaming perfection. It was exactly the kind of sophisticated yet romantic setting I had imagined for our celebration. The ceremony itself had been beautiful. We married in the estate's garden under an arch draped in white flowers and greenery. My father walked me down the aisle with tears in his eyes, seeing his daughter in the custom silk gown I had designed with input from the same seamstress who had taught my mother her craft. Marcus stood at the altar looking handsome in his tailored tuxedo, his expression showing what appeared to be genuine emotion as I approached. We exchanged vows we had written ourselves, promising partnership and honesty and unwavering support through whatever challenges life presented. The irony of those promises, given what I knew about his financial deception, sat like lead in my stomach even as I smiled and spoke the words. I had decided not to confront Marcus before the wedding. This decision came after several agonizing conversations with Isabella and one brutally honest discussion with my attorney. Canceling a wedding 8 weeks out would mean losing deposits totaling nearly $40,000. It would mean disappointing family members who had already arranged travel. It would mean explaining to 160 guests why the celebration was canceled. Most significantly, it would mean giving up on the possibility, however remote, that Marcus might have a legitimate explanation for the financial disaster I had discovered. My attorney had advised me that nothing legally required me to cancel the wedding based on the defaulted loan. The debt existed independently of our personal relationship. If I chose to move forward with the marriage, I could address the financial issues afterward through whatever means I deemed appropriate. If I chose to end the relationship, I could pursue the debt through normal collection processes. The wedding itself was not the point of no return. That would come later, if and when I decided to file joint tax returns or combine finances or make other legal commitments that would entangle our financial lives beyond simple marriage. So I moved forward with the ceremony, telling myself I was keeping my options open, that I was being rational and strategic, rather than simply avoiding a difficult confrontation. But beneath that rationalization was something more honest and more painful. I wanted to believe that I had not made a terrible mistake. I wanted to believe that the man I had agreed to marry was not fundamentally dishonest. I wanted to believe that there was some explanation that would make all of this make sense without requiring me to accept that I had been deceived. The reception began at 6 in the evening. Guests moved from the garden ceremony into the ballroom, where tables had been arranged around a central dance floor. Each table featured centerpieces of white roses and eucalyptus designed by the same florist who had created the ceremony. Arch string lights had been woven through the chandeliers, creating a warm glow that complemented the sunset visible through the windows. A jazz quartet played softly in one corner while guests found their assigned seats and servers circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. Marcus and I entered the ballroom to applause and cheers. We moved through our first dance, a slow jazz standard that Marcus had chosen because he said it reminded him of the night we met. We cut the cake, posed for countless photographs, and circulated among tables greeting guests and accepting congratulations. Marcus was charming and attentive, his hand frequently finding the small of my back, his smile bright and genuine appearing as he thanked people for coming and joked easily with friends and family. I watched him perform and wondered how much of what I was seeing was real. Was this affection genuine? Or was it simply another aspect of the image he maintained so carefully? Did he actually love me, or was I simply useful to him in ways I had not fully understood? The question circled endlessly in my mind even as I smiled and laughed and played my role in the celebration. Dinner was served around 7:30. The caterer had prepared a menu featuring my Colombian heritage, alongside Marcus's preference for classic American cuisine. Guests could choose between arepas with shredded beef or traditional filet mignon, between yuca fries or roasted potatoes, between tres leches cake or chocolate torte for dessert. It was a menu designed to honor both of our backgrounds, to create fusion and harmony, to symbolize the blending of two lives into one partnership. The symbolism felt increasingly hollow as the evening progressed. The speeches began after dinner. My father spoke first, his English still heavily accented after decades in this country. His words simple but deeply felt. He talked about watching me grow from a determined little girl into a successful woman who had built something from nothing through hard work and integrity. He talked about the pride he felt seeing me in my wedding dress, about his gratitude that I had found someone to build a life with, about his hopes for my happiness. His voice broke several times, and I could see my mother dabbing at her eyes with a napkin. Marcus's father spoke next. Richard Reeves was a senior partner at a prominent law firm, a man accustomed to commanding attention and respect. His speech was polished and witty, full of amusing anecdotes from Marcus's childhood and confident predictions about our future success as a couple. He spoke about the Reeves family tradition of strong marriages and professional achievement. He welcomed me into their family with language that sounded generous, but somehow felt like he was conferring a privilege, rather than expressing genuine warmth. I smiled and nodded at the appropriate moments, playing my role in the pageant. Isabella spoke on my behalf, having insisted that she wanted to give a toast even though wedding tradition did not strictly require it. She talked about our childhood, about watching me work multiple jobs to get through college, about my determination to build Luminaire into something meaningful. She talked about the qualities she hoped I would find in a life partner, someone who matched my integrity and work ethic, someone who valued honesty and partnership, someone who would support my dreams rather than diminishing them. Her emphasis on those particular qualities felt pointed, and I wondered if she was sending a message to Marcus or simply reminding me of what I deserved. Marcus's best man was a college friend named Tyler, someone I had met only a handful of times during our relationship. Tyler was an investment banker who shared Marcus's taste for expensive experiences and luxury brands. His speech was brief and focused primarily on stories from their fraternity days that were probably funnier to people who had been present than to the wedding guests hearing sanitized versions years later. He concluded with a generic toast to love and happiness that felt obligatory, rather than heartfelt. Then came the moment that changed everything. A woman I did not recognize stood up from a table near the back of the room. She was striking, with long auburn hair styled in waves, wearing a form-fitting emerald dress that looked expensive and deliberately chosen to stand out. She held a champagne glass in one hand and appeared completely sober despite the alcohol flowing freely throughout the reception. She did not wait for acknowledgement or permission. She simply began speaking, her voice clear and carrying easily across the now silent ballroom. "I am Vanessa Hartwell," she announced. "And I think there is something the bride should know before this marriage goes any further." The room went completely still. Conversations died mid-sentence. The jazz quartet stopped playing. Every head turned toward the woman in the emerald dress. Marcus's face went pale, then red, cycling through colors as he half rose from his chair before apparently deciding he had no idea how to respond. I sat frozen, my champagne glass suspended halfway to my lips, my mind racing to understand who this woman was and what she could possibly be about to say that would justify interrupting a wedding reception in front of 160 guests. "Marcus and I were together for 4 years, Vanessa continued, her tone conversational despite the dramatic context. "We lived together. We talked about marriage. And 2 years ago he proposed to me. He got down on one knee in front of my entire family at Christmas dinner and asked me to spend my life with him. I said yes." The murmuring started then, ripples of shock and confusion spreading through the guests. I could see people turning to their neighbors, whispering questions, trying to understand what was happening. I could see my parents looking confused and distressed. I could see Marcus's father rising from his seat, his expression furious. I remained completely still, waiting for whatever was coming next, feeling strangely calm despite the chaos erupting around me. We were engaged for 6 months, Vanessa said, her eyes fixed on me rather than Marcus. We planned a wedding. We looked at venues. We registered for gifts. And then one day Marcus came home and said he had made a mistake. He said he was not ready for marriage. He said he needed space to figure out what he wanted. He moved out while I was at work, taking most of his belongings and leaving a note rather than having an actual conversation. I finally found my voice. Why are you telling me this now? At my wedding reception? Vanessa's smile was bitter. Because 3 months ago I ran into Tyler at a bar downtown. He was drunk and chatty, and he told me all about Marcus's upcoming wedding to some woman who owned a jewelry company. He thought it was hilarious that Marcus had gotten himself so deep in debt buying a ring to impress you. He said Marcus had charged almost $70,000 for your engagement ring and had no idea how he was going to pay it off. The room erupted. I heard gasps, shocked exclamations, the scraping of chairs as people turned to get a better view of the unfolding drama. I heard Marcus saying something, but his words were drowned out by the noise. I heard my father demanding to know what was happening. I heard Isabella's voice, sharp and clear, telling everyone to be quiet. I stood up slowly, setting my champagne glass down on the table with careful precision. I looked at Vanessa, really looked at her, and saw something I recognized immediately. Pain. Humiliation. The need to ensure that someone else understood what she had experienced. She was not here to ruin my wedding out of pure malice. She was here because she had been where I was now, deceived and discarded, and she wanted to prevent me from making the same mistake she had made in trusting Marcus Reeves. Did he buy your engagement ring on credit? I asked, my voice cutting clearly through the chaos. Vanessa blinked, apparently surprised by the question. What? Your engagement ring when Marcus proposed to you. Did he buy it on credit that he never paid back? I do not know, Vanessa said slowly. He told me it was a family heirloom. His grandmother's ring reset with a new stone. But after we broke up, I tried to return it and discovered the stone was cubic zirconia. The setting was gold-plated brass. The entire ring was worth maybe $200. I absorbed this information, feeling pieces click into place. Marcus had a pattern. He created elaborate romantic gestures designed to overwhelm and impress. He made promises he had no intention of keeping. He constructed a persona of success and generosity that was built entirely on debt and deception. And when the inevitable collapse came, he simply moved on to the next person, leaving destruction in his wake. I turned to Marcus, who was still sitting at our table looking like he might be sick. Is it true? Were you engaged to her? Elena, this is not the time or place, Marcus began, his voice pleading. Can we please discuss this privately? Answer the question. Were you engaged to Vanessa? Marcus's jaw worked silently for a moment. Then he nodded, barely perceptibly. Yes, but it was a mistake. I realized we were not right for each other. That is why I ended it. That is why I moved on. You and I are different. What we have is real. What we have is $73,000 in unpaid debt, I said, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. What we have is you financing an engagement ring through my company, and then defaulting on the payments 3 months ago. What we have is a pattern of deception that apparently extends to at least one previous engagement you never mentioned during the entire 2 years we have been together. The room was utterly silent now. Every eye was on us, watching this confrontation play out in real time. I could see phones being held up, undoubtedly recording every moment for later distribution on social media. I could see my mother's horrified expression. I could see Marcus's father moving toward us with clear intent to intervene and control the situation. You went through my financial records? Marcus's voice shifted, taking on an edge of anger rather than pleading. You invaded my privacy? You defaulted on a loan from my company, I replied. That made it my business. Literally. And what I found was a complete financial disaster that you deliberately hid from me while pretending to be successful and solvent. Marcus stood up, his face flushed with anger and humiliation. This is insane. You are ruining our wedding over a misunderstanding about payments. I was going to handle it. I just needed more time. You have had 3 months. You have had multiple payment notices. You have had phone calls and emails. You were not planning to handle it. You were planning to ignore it and hope that our personal relationship would make the debt disappear. Richard Reeves reached our table, his expression thunderous. Elena, I understand you are upset, but this is neither the time nor the place for this discussion. You are embarrassing yourself and both families in front of all these guests. Whatever financial misunderstanding exists can be resolved privately through appropriate channels. I looked at Marcus's father, this imposing man who had spent his career manipulating language and facts to serve his clients' interests, and I understood exactly where Marcus had learned his approach to difficult realities. Deny, deflect, reframe the narrative, and above all, control the conversation by insisting on privacy that prevents accountability. There is no misunderstanding, I said clearly. Your son financed an engagement ring through my company using credit he could not afford. He has defaulted on that loan. He never disclosed his previous engagement or his history of financial irresponsibility. He has built his entire life on debt and deception, and I am not going to pretend otherwise to save him from embarrassment he has earned. I turned to address the entire room, all 160 guests who had traveled to celebrate what they believed was a joyful union. I apologize that you have witnessed this. I apologize that your time and travel have been wasted. But I cannot marry someone who has lied to me about fundamental aspects of his life. I cannot build a future with someone whose approach to difficulty is deception rather than honesty. I pulled off the engagement ring, that beautiful 2-carat emerald-cut diamond in its platinum setting that represented $73,000 in unpaid debt, and set it on the table in front of Marcus. You can keep this or return it to Luminaire for whatever credit the company policy allows, I said. Either way, you still owe the balance. My attorney will be in contact about repayment arrangements. I walked away from the table, moving toward the exit while the room erupted behind me. I could hear shouting, Marcus calling my name, his father demanding I come back, Isabella telling someone to let me go, my mother crying. I kept walking, my vision tunneling, focused only on reaching the door and getting out of this ballroom full of witnesses to my humiliation. I made it to the corridor outside before my legs started shaking. I leaned against the wall, pressing my palms flat against the cool plaster, trying to breathe through the adrenaline and shock and rage coursing through my system. I had just ended my marriage at my own wedding reception in front of everyone I knew. I had just publicly accused my husband of fraud and deception. I had just destroyed what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. And beneath the horror and humiliation, I felt something else. Relief. Enormous, overwhelming relief that I had discovered the truth before legally binding my life to someone who viewed honesty as optional and debt as someone else's problem to solve. Isabella found me in the corridor 5 minutes later. She wrapped her arms around me without saying anything, just holding me while I shook and tried to process what had just happened. After a long moment, she pulled back and looked at me with fierce pride in her eyes. That was the bravest thing I have ever seen you do, she said. That was the most humiliating moment of my entire life, I replied, my voice breaking. Maybe, but you told the truth when it would have been easier to stay quiet. You chose your integrity over your comfort. That takes courage most people never manage. My parents appeared next. My father's face creased with worry, my mother still crying but trying to compose herself. My father pulled me into a tight embrace, speaking rapid Spanish into my hair, telling me I had done the right thing, that he was proud of me, that everything would be okay. My mother stroked my back and murmured reassurances, maternal comfort that transcended language and logic. We stood in that corridor for perhaps 15 minutes, my family surrounding me while the chaos continued in the ballroom behind closed doors. Then the venue coordinator appeared, professional and sympathetic, asking what I needed from her. Did I want her to make an announcement to the guests? Did I want her to have the caterer pack up the remaining food for me to take? Did I want her to coordinate transportation for people who might need rides? I appreciated her practical focus on logistics rather than drama. I told her to make a brief announcement that the wedding celebration had concluded, that guests were welcome to stay and enjoy the remaining food and open bar if they wished, but that the bride and groom would not be returning. I told her to have the florist box up the centerpieces for any guests who wanted them. I told her to thank the staff for their professionalism. Then I asked her for the coordinator's office, somewhere I could sit and think and decide what to do next. She led me to a small room off the main corridor, furnished with a desk and 2 chairs and blessedly quiet. Isabella came with me while my parents returned to the ballroom to manage family questions and damage control. I sat in the coordinator's chair and stared at my hands, bare now without the engagement ring. My wedding band was still in its box somewhere, never having made it onto my finger during the ceremony that had happened but somehow also had not happened. Legally, I was married to Marcus. We had signed the license. The officiant had pronounced us married. The state recognized our union. But the marriage felt like a technicality rather than a reality, a legal status that existed on paper but had no substance beneath it. What happens now? Isabella asked gently. I file for annulment, I said, the decision forming even as I spoke the words. Based on fraud. He concealed material information about his financial status and his previous engagement. That is grounds for annulment in this state. The marriage gets erased as though it never existed. And the debt? I pursue it through normal collection processes. He signed a contract. He owes the money. His failure to pay damages my company financially. I have every right and obligation to collect what he owes. Isabella nodded. What about right now? Tonight? Where are you going to go? I had not thought that far ahead. My apartment, the space that had been my sanctuary, now contained Marcus's belongings. He had been living there for over a year. His clothes hung in my closet. His toiletries filled half my bathroom. His laptop sat on my desk. The thought of returning there, of seeing physical evidence of his presence in my space, felt unbearable. Can I stay with you? I asked. Just for tonight? I know it is a long drive, but I cannot go home right now. Of course, Isabella said immediately. We will leave as soon as you are ready. The guest room is always available, and you can stay as long as you need. We sat in that quiet office for another 30 minutes while Isabella fielded phone calls from concerned family members, and I stared at the wall trying to process the complete destruction of my life as I had understood it just hours before. Then I changed out of my wedding dress in the venue's bridal suite, leaving the custom silk gown hanging on the door like a ghost of what should have been. I put on the casual clothes I had packed for changing into after the reception, jeans and a soft sweater that felt like armor after the vulnerability of the wedding dress. Isabella and I walked out through the service exit to avoid any remaining guests. We drove in silence for the first hour, my sister apparently recognizing that I needed quiet rather than conversation. Somewhere around the halfway point I finally spoke. I almost married him knowing he had deceived me. I almost went through with it because I did not want to lose the deposits or disappoint everyone or admit I had made a mistake in choosing him. But you did not, Isabella replied. When it mattered, when you had to make the actual choice, you chose truth over comfort. That is what counts. Vanessa saved me, I said slowly, recognizing the truth of it. If she had not shown up, if she had not been willing to make a scene and tell the truth publicly, I might have gone through with it. I might have convinced myself I could manage the situation, that I could fix him or change him or at least contain the damage. Maybe. But I think you would have figured it out eventually. You are too smart and too strong to stay with someone like Marcus long-term. Vanessa just accelerated the timeline. We reached Isabella's house after midnight. Her husband greeted us at the door, having stayed home with their sleeping children while Isabella attended the wedding. He took one look at my face and simply pulled me into a hug, offering comfort without requiring explanation. Isabella showed me to the guest room, brought me water and pajamas, and left me alone to process. I sat on the edge of the bed in my sister's guest room, surrounded by the detritus of her children's outgrown toys and books, and began planning. I would file for annulment first thing Monday morning. I would change the locks on my apartment. I would have Marcus's belongings packed and moved to storage at his expense. I would document every communication in case he attempted to contest the annulment or the debt collection. I would protect myself with the same strategic thinking I had used to build Luminaire, treating this situation as a business problem requiring systematic solutions rather than an emotional catastrophe that had no resolution. And then, when I had secured my legal and financial position, I would figure out how to rebuild the parts of myself that had been damaged by trusting someone who had proven spectacularly unworthy of that trust. I woke up in Isabella's guest room at 6 in the morning after maybe 3 hours of fractured sleep. The early light filtering through the curtains felt accusatory, illuminating a reality I was not yet prepared to face. I was married to a man I had publicly denounced at my own wedding reception. I was legally bound to someone who had systematically deceived me about fundamental aspects of his character and circumstances. I had a business to protect, a reputation to manage, and a complete reconstruction of my life to undertake starting immediately. I lay still for several minutes, staring at the ceiling and cataloging everything that needed to happen. The list was overwhelming. File for annulment. Change apartment locks. Remove Marcus's belongings. Address the financial debt. Manage family fallout. Handle business implications. Deal with inevitable social media coverage. Each item spawned additional subtasks that expanded exponentially when I considered them carefully. The scope of work required to extract myself from this situation felt paralyzing. Isabella knocked softly on the door around 7, entering with coffee when I called out that I was awake. She sat on the edge of the bed and handed me the mug without speaking, giving me space to organize my thoughts before conversation. I appreciated her understanding that I needed practical support, more than emotional processing in this moment. I need to make a plan, I said after several sips of coffee had begun clearing the fog from my mind. I need to write down everything that has to happen and in what order, because right now it all feels like chaos and I cannot function in chaos. Isabella retrieved a legal pad and pen from her home office. We spent the next 2 hours at her kitchen table while her family slept, creating a comprehensive action plan that transformed overwhelming emotional catastrophe into manageable tasks with clear timelines and success criteria. The exercise itself was therapeutic, imposing structure and logic onto circumstances that felt uncontrollable. The first priority was legal protection. I needed to consult with a family law attorney who specialized in annulments to understand the process, requirements, and timeline. I needed to ensure the annulment filing happened before Marcus could take any legal action that might complicate matters. I needed to document everything related to his financial deception and the concealed previous engagement, creating an evidentiary record that would support the fraud claim underlying the annulment petition. The second priority was physical security. I needed to change my apartment locks immediately to prevent Marcus from accessing my space or removing items that belonged to me. I needed to arrange for his belongings to be packed and moved to a storage unit that he would be responsible for paying. I needed to update building security about the situation to ensure they would not grant him access if he appeared claiming he still lived there. The third priority was financial protection. I needed to separate any joint accounts or credit arrangements we had established. I needed to document the full scope of the defaulted loan through Luminaire. I needed to consult with my business attorney about the proper process for pursuing collection, while managing the conflict of interest created by my personal relationship with the debtor. I needed to protect Luminaire from any potential liability or reputational damage that might result from this situation becoming public. The fourth priority was managing communications and reputation. I needed to prepare a statement for family and close friends that explained the situation without requiring me to repeat the story countless times. I needed to consider whether Luminaire required any public statement addressing the situation, particularly if media coverage emerged. I needed to decide how to handle social media, whether to address what happened directly or simply remove my personal accounts from public view temporarily. Isabella listened to this planning process without interruption, occasionally adding practical suggestions, but mostly letting me work through the logic systematically. When I finished outlining the priorities, she looked at me with an expression mixing sympathy and admiration. "You are treating this like a business crisis that requires methodical management, rather than a personal catastrophe that justifies falling apart," she observed. "That is either incredibly healthy compartmentalization or really sophisticated denial. I cannot tell which." "It is survival," I replied. "If I let myself feel everything right now, I will be completely non-functional. I can process the emotional aspects after I have secured my legal and financial position. Right now I need to focus on protection and damage control." Isabella nodded slowly. "Just promise me you will actually do that processing eventually. You cannot run a business forever on strategic thinking alone. At some point you need to acknowledge that this hurt you and allow yourself to grieve what you lost." I promised, though I was not entirely certain I believed my own commitment. Emotional processing felt like a luxury I could not afford when practical threats still required immediate attention. But Isabella was right that permanently avoiding the feelings would eventually create problems I could not strategically plan my way out of. Around 9 in the morning I began making calls. The first was to my attorney, Jennifer Castellano, who handled all legal matters for Luminaire, and had become a trusted advisor over the years. I reached her cell phone, apologizing for calling on Sunday morning, but explaining that the situation was genuinely urgent. Jennifer listened to my summary of events without interruption. When I finished, there was a long pause before she responded, her tone carefully neutral in the way attorneys employ when they are calibrating how to deliver difficult information. Elena, I need to be very direct with you about something. The fact that you own the company Marcus owes money to creates a significant conflict of interest in any annulment proceeding. He could argue that you are seeking annulment primarily to facilitate debt collection, rather than because the marriage itself was fraudulent. That argument might not succeed, but it would complicate the case and potentially delay resolution. I felt my stomach drop. I had not considered that my business interests might actually work against me in terminating the marriage. What are you suggesting? That I should stay married to someone who lied to me in order to avoid the appearance of improper motivation? Not at all, Jennifer said quickly. I am suggesting that you need a family law specialist who can navigate these complications skillfully. I can make a referral to someone excellent, but you also need to be prepared that this might not be as straightforward as a typical annulment case. Marcus has incentive to contest it, and he has a built-in narrative about your supposed ulterior motives. We discussed strategy for another 20 minutes. Jennifer recommended an attorney named Michael Torres who had extensive experience with complex annulment cases and a reputation for aggressive but ethical advocacy. She offered to make an introduction and expedite an initial consultation. I accepted gratefully, recognizing that this situation required specialized expertise beyond what my business attorney could provide. The second call was to a locksmith service that advertised 24-hour emergency availability. I explained that I needed all locks changed at my apartment immediately due to a domestic situation that required preventing my estranged spouse from accessing the property. The dispatcher was professional and unsympathetic in the best possible way, treating this as a routine service call rather than a dramatic personal crisis. A technician could be at my apartment by noon. The third call was to Patricia, my finance manager at Luminaire. I had been dreading this conversation because it required acknowledging to an employee that my personal life had become entangled with company business in exactly the way I had always been scrupulous to avoid. Patricia answered on the second ring, her voice alert despite the early Sunday hour. Elena, I heard something happened at your wedding. Are you all right? I appreciated that she asked about my well-being before jumping to business implications. I am managing, but I need to discuss the Marcus Reeves account and how we are going to handle it going forward given that the personal relationship has ended. Patricia exhaled audibly. I was hoping you would call. I did not want to intrude on your personal situation, but we need to make decisions about that account soon. We are now 4 months delinquent, and corporate policy requires either payment arrangements or referral to collections at 90 days past due. We discussed options methodically. Patricia recommended engaging a third-party collection agency to pursue the debt, creating separation between my personal situation and Luminaire's business interests. The agency would charge a percentage of whatever they recovered, but they would also assume the work of contacting Marcus, documenting attempts at collection, and potentially pursuing legal remedies if he continued refusing to pay. Most importantly, they would create a buffer that protected me from accusations that I was using my business position to harass or punish Marcus personally. I approved the collection referral and asked Patricia to handle all documentation and communications with the agency. I wanted my personal involvement limited to the absolute minimum necessary for authorization purposes. Patricia agreed and promised to have everything processed by Monday afternoon. The fourth call was the most difficult. I dialed my parents, knowing they would be awake and likely frantic with worry after the previous night's events. My mother answered immediately, her voice strained with the kind of maternal anxiety that transcends language and culture. Mija, where are you? Are you safe? Your father and I have been so worried. We tried calling but your phone was off. I had turned off my phone after leaving the venue to avoid the inevitable barrage of calls and messages from wedding guests and family members seeking explanation or offering unwanted opinions. The decision had been necessary for my sanity, but had apparently caused my parents significant distress. I am sorry, Mama. I am safe. I am at Isabella's house. I turned off my phone because I needed quiet to think. My mother began crying. That particular kind of maternal weeping that communicates both relief and continued worry. My father took the phone, his voice gruff with emotion. Elena, what happened? We do not understand. You married Marcus and then suddenly you were saying he lied to you and then you left. People are saying things, terrible things, and we do not know what is true. I explained as simply as I could manage. Marcus had been engaged before and never told me. Marcus had bought my engagement ring on credit through my company, and then defaulted on the payments. Marcus had a history of financial irresponsibility that he had deliberately concealed. When his ex-girlfriend revealed the previous engagement at the reception, everything came out at once in the worst possible way. My father listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a long silence before he spoke, his voice heavy with disappointment. This man is not who we thought he was. This man is not worthy of you. You did the right thing, Mija, even though it was hard. Even though people saw. The truth matters more than appearances. His validation meant more than I had anticipated. My parents came from a generation and culture where marriage was permanent, where ending a relationship brought shame, where family reputation mattered enormously. Hearing my father explicitly support my decision despite those cultural values gave me permission to trust my own judgment without guilt. My mother took the phone back, her crying having subsided into occasional sniffles. What do you need from us, Elena? How can we help? I thought about that question carefully. What I needed most was exactly what they were already providing. The acknowledgement that I had made a difficult but correct choice. The reassurance that they still respected me. The promise of continued family support regardless of social consequences. Just believe me when I say I made the right decision, I said quietly. Just trust that I did not do this lightly or cruelly. Just know that staying married to Marcus would have been worse than ending things publicly. We believe you, my father said firmly. We trust your judgment. We are proud of your strength. We talked for a few more minutes about practical logistics, whether they should return home to Florida immediately or stay in town to provide support, whether they needed me to make any statements to extended family members who would inevitably have questions. I told them to go home, that I needed space and time to handle the legal and business aspects before I could manage family politics. They accepted reluctantly, making me promise to call every day, and to ask immediately if I needed anything. After ending the call, I sat at Isabella's kitchen table feeling emotionally wrung out despite the early hour. For phone calls had taken nearly 3 hours and had depleted my energy reserves substantially. But they had also provided crucial structure, transforming overwhelming catastrophe into a series of manageable next steps with clear owners and timelines. Isabella appeared with more coffee and toast, correctly intuiting that I had not eaten anything since the previous evening's wedding dinner that I had barely touched. I forced myself to eat mechanically, recognizing that my body needed fuel even though I had no appetite. What happens next? Isabella asked, settling into the chair across from me. I meet the locksmith at my apartment at noon. I pack Marcus's belongings. I box up anything that reminds me of him or our relationship. I reclaim my space as entirely mine. Do you want company? I can come with you if facing the apartment alone feels too difficult. I considered the offer. Part of me wanted Isabella's support, the practical help and emotional presence of someone I trusted completely. But another part recognized that I needed to do this alone, to prove to myself that I could handle difficult tasks without requiring rescue. Thank you, but I need to do this myself. I need to know I can walk into that space and not fall apart. But maybe you could be available by phone in case it turns out I am wrong about my capacity? Isabella agreed, making me promise to call immediately if I felt overwhelmed. We spent the rest of the morning in quiet companionship, Isabella preparing lunch for her family while I drafted the statement I would send to close friends and family explaining the situation. I revised it multiple times, trying to find language that was honest without being vindictive, that explained my decision without requiring me to reveal every painful detail. The final version read, "Yesterday I made the difficult decision to end my marriage to Marcus immediately after our wedding ceremony. I learned information about his previous relationships and financial circumstances that he had deliberately concealed throughout our relationship. This deception made it impossible to move forward with the marriage in good conscience. I know this situation is unusual and that many of you have questions. I appreciate your support and understanding as I navigate this difficult time. I am not able to discuss details further right now, but I want you to know that I am safe and that I made this decision after careful consideration. Thank you for respecting my privacy. I sent the statement to approximately 30 people who I knew would be concerned and would likely hear distorted versions through gossip networks if I did not provide some basic facts. Then I turned my phone back on and watched as notification after notification flooded the screen. Text messages, missed calls, voicemails, social media mentions, emails. The sheer volume was overwhelming, and I quickly activated a do not disturb mode that would allow calls only from my immediate family. At 11:30, I said goodbye to Isabella and her family and began the drive back to the city. The highway stretched before me, familiar and comforting in its mundane normality. Other drivers were going about their regular Sunday activities, completely unaware that the woman in the car next to them had just destroyed her wedding and was returning to dismantle the physical remnants of a relationship built on lies. I arrived at my apartment building at 11:45 and sat in my car for several minutes, gathering courage to go inside. The building looked exactly as it always had, red brick facade with Art Deco details, well-maintained landscaping, the kind of solid middle-class respectability I had worked so hard to achieve. But now it felt contaminated somehow, tainted by Marcus's presence and the realization that I had allowed someone fundamentally dishonest into my most private space. The locksmith arrived precisely at noon, an efficient woman in her 40s who introduced herself as Carmen, and immediately got to work assessing the existing locks and explaining the replacement options. I chose high-security deadbolts that could not be easily picked or bumped, wanting every possible barrier between Marcus and unauthorized entry. Carmen worked methodically, removing old hardware and installing new mechanisms while maintaining a stream of professional commentary about security features and proper key management. Bad breakup? She asked casually while drilling new bolt holes. Wedding day breakup, I replied, surprising myself with the dark humor in my tone. Discovered my husband had been lying about basically everything important approximately 4 hours after we got married. Carmen paused her drilling and looked at me with an expression mixing sympathy and respect. That takes guts, ending it that fast. Most people convince themselves to give it more time, try to make it work, pretend the problems are not that serious. You saved yourself years of worse problems down the line. Her matter-of-fact validation helped more than elaborate expressions of sympathy would have. This was a practical problem that I was solving through practical means. The emotional weight was real, but it did not prevent me from taking necessary action to protect myself. Carmen finished the lock installation and provided me with 3 keys for each new lock. She tested everything multiple times to ensure proper function, then showed me how to operate the mechanisms and explain the security features. I paid her fee plus a generous tip for working on Sunday, and for treating my situation with professionalism rather than prurient curiosity. After she left, I stood in my apartment looking at familiar surroundings that somehow felt foreign. Marcus's presence was everywhere. His jacket on the coat hook, his shoes by the door, his coffee mug in the dish drainer, his laptop on the desk, his books on the shelf, his scent embedded in the furniture and fabrics. 2 years of gradual infiltration had left my space feeling more like ours than mine, and now I needed to systematically erase every trace of him. I began in the bedroom, pulling his clothes from the closet and dresser drawers, folding everything with mechanical precision, and packing it into large cardboard boxes I had picked up from a moving supply store on my way home. I did not allow myself to linger over individual items or remember occasions when he had worn particular pieces. This was data entry, inventory management, the systematic cataloging and removal of assets that no longer belonged in this location. The bathroom came next. His toiletries went into a smaller box. His prescriptions, his razor, his cologne, his hair products. I worked quickly, not wanting to spend more time than necessary in this intimate space that now felt violated by his presence. The living areas were more complicated because they contained items we had acquired together or gifts he had given me that I was not certain I wanted to keep. I made ruthless decisions, Anything he had purchased went into boxes. Anything given as a gift during our relationship went into boxes. Anything that reminded me of specific moments we had shared went into boxes. I was purging not just his physical possessions but the memories attached to them, creating space for a future that did not include him. By 4 in the afternoon, I had packed 17 boxes and assembled a substantial pile of larger items that would not fit in boxes. Furniture he had brought from his previous apartment, sporting equipment, electronics, decorative items he had insisted on adding to my carefully curated aesthetic. I photographed everything, creating documentation of exactly what I was removing from the apartment in case Marcus later claimed I had kept or damaged his property. I called a moving and storage company that advertised same-day service. The dispatcher asked whether I needed help packing, and I explained that everything was already boxed and ready for transport. A crew could be there within 2 hours. I provided Marcus's name and credit card information from the financial records I had obtained, authorizing them to charge him for the moving and storage costs. If the card declined, they were to call me and I would provide alternative payment with the understanding that I would add those costs to the debt he already owed. While waiting for the movers, I tackled one final task. I went through my apartment removing photographs, cards, small mementos, everything that documented our relationship visually or sentimentally. I did not destroy these items immediately, recognizing that I might later regret impulsive destruction even if I could not imagine wanting to preserve them. Instead, I packed them into a single box that I labeled Archive and placed in the back of my storage closet, acknowledging their existence while removing them from daily visibility. The moving crew arrived at 6 and worked efficiently to load everything I had designated for removal. The crew chief had me sign paperwork confirming the contents and the storage unit assignment. They would deliver everything to a climate-controlled unit across town, provide Marcus with the unit number and access information, and bill him monthly for the storage fees until he removed his belongings. It was the most professional and impersonal way to return his possessions, creating clear documentation and avoiding any need for direct contact. After the movers left, my apartment looked simultaneously more spacious and more empty. Walls had gaps where his artwork had hung. Shelves had spaces where his books had stood. The closet had room where his clothes had been crammed. The emptiness felt like possibility rather than loss, space I could fill with things that actually reflected my taste and values, rather than compromises made to accommodate someone else's preferences. I ordered food delivery, not trusting myself to cook anything substantial. While waiting for the food to arrive, I walked through my apartment with a notebook, documenting everything that still needed to happen. Contact the building management to remove Marcus from the lease and update emergency contact information. Change passwords on all accounts he might have had access to. Review bank statements to ensure no unauthorized charges had occurred. Contact vendors for the canceled wedding reception and honeymoon to arrange refunds or credits. Update my will and other legal documents that had named Marcus as beneficiary or decision-maker. The list was long, but it was finite. Each item had a clear completion criterion. I could work through these tasks systematically, checking them off as I re-established complete control over my personal and financial life. The process would take time and energy, but it was entirely within my capacity to manage. My phone rang around 7. I did not recognize the number but answered anyway, having turned off the do not disturb mode when I returned to my apartment. Elena Vasquez? The voice was male, professional, unfamiliar. Yes, who is calling? My name is David Morrison. I am an attorney representing Marcus Reeves. I am calling to discuss the annulment petition you apparently intend to file, and to see if we can resolve this matter amicably before it proceeds to litigation. I felt a surge of anger at Marcus's audacity. He had not contacted me directly to apologize or explain or attempt any personal accountability. Instead, he had immediately hired an attorney to manage the situation and protect his interests. The choice revealed everything about his priorities and his character. I have retained counsel, I said calmly. All communications should go through my attorney. I will provide you with contact information. I understand you are upset, Mrs. Reeves, but I think if we could just talk reasonably about this situation, we might find that litigation is unnecessary. My client is willing to discuss the financial matters you raised if you are willing to reconsider the annulment. The presumption in his words was breathtaking. He was suggesting that Marcus might be willing to acknowledge the debt if I stayed married to him, as though remaining in a fraudulent marriage was a reasonable trade for him finally honoring his financial obligations. Your client concealed a previous engagement and substantial financial problems throughout our relationship, I replied, my voice hardening. He purchased an engagement ring using credit he could not afford and then defaulted on payments to my company. He has demonstrated a pattern of deception that makes marriage impossible. I will not reconsider the annulment under any circumstances, and the debt is a separate matter that will be handled through appropriate collection processes. Please direct all future communications to my attorney. I provided Jennifer Castellano's contact information and ended the call before Morrison could continue his pitch. Then I immediately called Jennifer to alert her that Marcus had retained counsel and that his attorney would likely be contacting her. Jennifer sighed audibly. So he is going to fight this? That makes everything more complicated and more expensive, but it does not change the fundamental merits of your case. We will deal with his attorney and make it clear that you have documentation supporting fraud claims and that you are not interested in negotiation. After that call, I sat on my couch in my reclaimed apartment and felt the enormity of what I was facing begin to penetrate the protective shell of strategic planning and systematic task completion. This was not going to be simple or quick. Marcus was going to contest the annulment, probably to gain leverage in the debt negotiation or simply because his ego could not tolerate the public narrative of him being at fault. The legal process would drag on for months, maybe longer. The financial costs would be substantial. The emotional toll would be significant. But beneath the anxiety about the difficulties ahead, I felt something else. Determination. Absolute certainty that I had made the correct choice, and that I would see it through regardless of how unpleasant the process became. Marcus had gambled that I would tolerate his deception to avoid embarrassment and disruption. He had miscalculated catastrophically. I would not be manipulated or intimidated into accepting treatment I did not deserve or remaining in a relationship built on lies. I spent the rest of that evening in my quiet apartment, eating mediocre takeout food and beginning the work of documenting everything I could remember about Marcus's financial representations during our relationship. Every conversation about his income or career prospects. Every time he had insisted on paying for expensive experiences. Every reassurance he had provided about his financial stability when I had raised questions about our future plans. I wrote it all down with dates and context, creating a comprehensive record that would support the fraud claim underlying my annulment petition. By the time I finally went to bed around midnight, exhausted but unable to sleep, I had filled 20 pages with detailed notes. The exercise had been painful, forcing me to confront how many warning signs I had rationalized or ignored. But it had also been clarifying, revealing the systematic nature of Marcus's deception, and reinforcing my conviction that ending the marriage was not an overreaction but rather the only reasonable response to discovering the truth about who I had married. I lay in bed in the darkness, listening to familiar city sounds outside my window, and recognized that I had crossed an irreversible threshold. My life would never return to what it had been before yesterday. The future I had imagined with Marcus was gone, replaced by uncertainty and the prospect of rebuilding from devastation. But that uncertainty also contained possibility, the chance to create something authentic, rather than something built on the unstable foundation of someone else's lies. And that possibility, frightening as it was, felt more valuable than the false security I had been clinging to before everything collapsed. Monday morning arrived with the kind of gray, drizzling rain that matched my emotional state perfectly. I woke early after another night of fragmented sleep, my mind refusing to shut down despite physical exhaustion. The apartment felt different in the morning light. Emptier but also somehow more authentically mine than it had been in months. I made coffee in the quiet kitchen and prepared myself mentally for what would be the first full day of actively dismantling my marriage, while simultaneously protecting my business from collateral damage. My first appointment was at 9 o'clock with Michael Torres, the family law attorney Jennifer had recommended. His office occupied the 15th floor of a downtown high-rise with views overlooking the financial district. The reception area was decorated in soothing neutral tones with artwork that probably cost more than most people's cars, the kind of calculated elegance that communicated both success and discretion. I checked in with the receptionist and was shown immediately to a conference room where Michael was already waiting. Michael Torres was in his mid-40s, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that fit perfectly, with silver threading through his dark hair in a way that suggested distinguished experience rather than age. He stood when I entered and shook my hand with the kind of firm grip that communicated competence without aggression. His manner was professional but warm, striking the balance between sympathy for my situation and the businesslike approach I needed. "Ms. Vasquez, thank you for coming in on such short notice. Jennifer spoke highly of you and briefed me on the general situation. I have reviewed the preliminary information she forwarded, but I would like to hear the full story directly from you so I can understand exactly what we are dealing with." I spent the next 45 minutes walking him through everything chronologically. Meeting Marcus, the development of our relationship, the proposal with the ring purchase through Luminaire, my discovery of the defaulted loan, the public records revealing his financial history, the previous engagement he had never disclosed, and finally the catastrophic wedding reception where everything exploded publicly. Michael took detailed notes without interrupting, occasionally asking clarifying questions about specific dates or documentation I had access to. When I finished, he set down his pen and looked at me with an expression that combined legal assessment with human understanding. "You have a strong case for annulment based on fraud. Marcus concealed material information about his financial status and his relationship history, both of which would have affected your decision to marry him had you known the truth. The fact that the deception was discovered almost immediately after the ceremony strengthens your position, as it demonstrates you did not ratify the marriage with full knowledge of the fraud." Relief washed through me, the first uncomplicated positive emotion I had felt since Saturday. "So we can move forward quickly?" Michael's expression became more guarded. "We can move forward strategically. However, I need to be honest with you about the complications. Marcus has retained David Morrison, who is a competent attorney known for aggressive tactics and protracted litigation. Morrison called my office this morning before our meeting, presumably trying to establish communication before you and I had spoken. That tells me Marcus intends to fight this rather than accept a straightforward annulment." "On what grounds could he possibly contest it?" I asked, feeling frustration rise. "The evidence of fraud is documented and extensive. He lied about major aspects of his life. What legitimate defense could he have?" "Legitimate and strategic are different things," Michael replied. "Morrison will likely argue that any misrepresentations were not material to the marriage decision, or that you knew about some of the financial issues and married him anyway, or that you are seeking annulment primarily to facilitate debt collection rather than because the marriage itself was fraudulent. None of these arguments are likely to succeed, but they can delay resolution significantly while running up legal costs for both sides." I absorbed this information, recognizing the pattern I had seen so many times in business contexts where parties with weak positions use procedural delays and escalating costs as leverage to force unfavorable settlements. "So he is betting that I will give up or compromise to avoid the expense and hassle of protracted litigation." "Exactly. It is a common tactic, and unfortunately it often works because people reach a point where they decide that winning is not worth the cost in time, money, and emotional energy. We need to make clear from the outset that you are prepared to see this through regardless of how unpleasant Morrison makes the process." We spent the next hour developing strategy. Michael would file the annulment petition immediately, including detailed allegations of fraud supported by documentation I would provide. The petition would request not just annulment but also attorney fees, arguing that Marcus's fraudulent conduct necessitated legal action, and he should bear the cost. Simultaneously, Michael would file a motion for temporary orders preventing Marcus from making any claims on my business or personal assets during the pendency of the annulment proceedings. Michael explained that the financial debt Marcus owed to Luminaire would be treated as a separate matter, to be resolved through collection processes independent of the annulment. This separation was crucial for defeating Morrison's expected argument that I was using the annulment as leverage for debt collection. By keeping the matters completely distinct and pursuing the debt through normal business channels, we would undermine any claim of improper motivation. "I need to prepare you for something else," Michael said as our meeting was concluding. "Morrison will almost certainly attempt to depose you, requiring you to answer questions under oath about your relationship with Marcus, your business practices, your decision-making process regarding the marriage. Depositions can be extremely unpleasant, designed to provoke emotional responses and create inconsistencies that can be used against you later. You will need to prepare thoroughly and maintain composure regardless of how aggressive the questioning becomes. The thought of sitting in a room with Marcus's attorney while being interrogated about intimate details of my failed relationship felt violating and infuriating. But I recognized it as another tactical challenge that required strategic response rather than emotional reaction. When would this happen? Probably within the next 60 days. Morrison will want to conduct discovery quickly to identify any weaknesses in your position. We will prepare extensively before your deposition. You will know exactly what to expect and how to respond effectively. I left Michael's office feeling both reassured by his competence and overwhelmed by the complexity of what lay ahead. The annulment was not going to be a simple administrative process. It was going to be a full legal battle requiring significant time, money, and emotional resilience. But the alternative, staying married to Marcus or accepting some compromise that left the fraud unaddressed, was unthinkable. I would do whatever was necessary to extract myself completely from this situation. My next stop was Luminaire. I had been avoiding the office since Saturday, not wanting to face employees who had undoubtedly heard about the wedding disaster and would have questions or opinions or sympathy I was not prepared to receive. But I could not hide indefinitely. I was the CEO and founder. The business required my leadership regardless of my personal circumstances. I arrived at the showroom around 11 and was immediately struck by how normal everything looked. The elegant display cases held rings that sparkled under carefully positioned lighting. The consultation tables were arranged invitingly for customers to sit and discuss their vision for custom pieces. The air carried the faint scent of the luxury candles we burned to create ambience. My professional world continued functioning exactly as it always had, completely unaffected by the personal catastrophe that had consumed my entire existence for the past 2 days. Patricia was in her office reviewing accounts when I knocked on her door frame. She looked up and immediately stood, her expression showing concern without pity, exactly the response I needed. "Elena, I am glad you are here. I was not sure if you would come in today or if you needed more time." "I needed to be here," I replied, settling into the chair across from her desk. "I needed to see that the business is still functioning, that everything I built is not collapsing because my personal life imploded." Patricia nodded, understanding. "The business is solid. We had a good week last week despite everything. 3 new custom orders, 2 completed projects delivered to very happy customers, and generally positive metrics across the board. Luminaire is not dependent on your personal life being perfect. It is dependent on the quality we deliver and the reputation we have built, and both of those are intact." Her matter-of-fact assessment helped ground me. I had been catastrophizing, imagining that the wedding scandal would somehow destroy the business I had spent 8 years building. But Patricia was right. Customers cared about the quality of their rings and the experience of working with Luminaire. My personal relationship dramas were not particularly relevant to those concerns. "What about the Marcus account?" I asked, shifting to the specific business matter that required immediate attention. Patricia pulled up the file on her computer. "I contacted the collection agency we discussed yesterday. They have agreed to take the account and pursue collection through standard processes. All communications will go through them rather than directly from Luminaire to Marcus. They will report progress to me, and I will keep you informed of any significant developments. Your personal involvement will be minimal." "What are the realistic chances of actually recovering the money?" I asked, wanting honest assessment rather than optimistic reassurance. Patricia considered the question carefully before responding. "Given Marcus's apparent financial situation, probably modest. Collection agencies typically recover somewhere between 20 and 40% of defaulted consumer debt. In this case, the amount is substantial enough that Marcus cannot simply ignore it, but his overall financial instability means he may not have resources to pay even if he wants to. We may end up settling for partial payment or accepting a payment plan that stretches over years." I nodded, having expected something like this assessment. "I am less concerned about actually recovering the full amount than I am about ensuring proper documentation and making clear that Luminaire treats all defaulted accounts consistently regardless of personal relationships. We cannot create the appearance that debts are forgiven when the debtor has a personal connection to ownership." "Agreed. The collection agency will create a paper trail showing we pursued this account exactly as we would any other default. That protects the business from any accusations of preferential treatment or improper debt forgiveness. We discussed several other operational matters before I left Patricia's office feeling reassured that the business side was being managed competently. I spent the next hour walking through the showroom and workshop, greeting staff members who offered subdued congratulations on my wedding, before apparently realizing the situation was more complicated than they understood. I kept interactions brief and professional, not wanting to explain or discuss what had happened, but also not wanting to seem like I was hiding or ashamed. Rebecca, my lead designer who had worked with Marcus on my engagement ring, found me in the workshop examining a custom setting one of our jewelers was completing. She approached hesitantly, clearly uncertain how to navigate the awkward situation. "Elena, I need to apologize. When Marcus came in to design your ring, he told me he wanted to surprise you with something extraordinary. He was so enthusiastic about the design process, so specific about what he thought you would love. I never suspected that he was financing it in a way he could not afford. If I had known, I would have said something to you." I looked at Rebecca's genuinely distressed expression and felt sympathy for her position. She had been manipulated just as I had been, used as an unwitting participant in Marcus's deception. "You have nothing to apologize for. You did exactly what you should have done, working with a customer to create a beautiful custom piece. Marcus's financial decisions were not your responsibility or concern. The ring itself is lovely. The problem was never the ring. The problem was the dishonesty surrounding it." Rebecca visibly relaxed, clearly relieved that I was not angry with her. We talked for a few more minutes about upcoming projects before I excused myself to return to my office. I had emails to address, business decisions to make, the ordinary work of running a company that could not be indefinitely postponed because my personal life was in chaos. Around 2 in the afternoon, my phone rang with a call from an unknown number. I almost declined it, assuming it was a reporter or someone wanting gossip about the wedding disaster. But something made me answer, perhaps curiosity or perhaps the recognition that avoiding every uncomfortable call was not a sustainable strategy. "Elena Vasquez?" The voice was female, uncertain, slightly familiar but not immediately identifiable. "Yes, who is calling?" "This is Vanessa Hartwell. We met at your wedding reception. I am calling because I wanted to apologize for how I handled that situation and to explain why I did what I did." I sat back in my office chair, surprised by the call but also curious. Vanessa had been the catalyst for everything exploding publicly, and I had complicated feelings about her role in the disaster. "I am listening." Vanessa took an audible breath before continuing. "When Tyler told me about Marcus getting married, something broke inside me. I had spent 2 years trying to move past what he did to me, trying to convince myself that I had just been unlucky in choosing the wrong person. But hearing that he was doing the exact same thing to someone else, the elaborate proposal and the expensive ring and the whole performance of being this successful, generous man, I could not stay silent. I could not let another woman go through what I went through without at least trying to warn her." "So you came to my wedding reception specifically to expose him?" I asked, trying to understand her thought process and motivation. "I came to the reception thinking I would talk to you privately, pull you aside and tell you what I knew, give you information and let you decide what to do with it. But when I got there and saw him playing the devoted husband, saw him performing for all those guests, saw the whole elaborate production, I got angry. I got so angry that he was getting away with it again, that he was going to keep doing this to women and never facing any real consequences. So I stood up and said it publicly instead of privately. And I am sorry for that. I am sorry that I humiliated you in front of everyone instead of giving you the information discreetly so you could handle it on your own terms." I considered her words carefully. Part of me was angry that Vanessa had chosen public exposure over private disclosure, that she had made my humiliation a spectacle for 160 wedding guests. But another part recognized that her public intervention had forced an immediate confrontation that I might otherwise have delayed or avoided, that I might have convinced myself to manage privately while remaining in a fraudulent marriage. "I appreciate the apology," I said finally, "and I understand why you did what you did, even if I wish it had happened differently. The information you provided was accurate and important, and it ultimately allowed me to make an informed decision about my marriage. So while the method was painful, the outcome was necessary. Vanessa was quiet for a moment. Are you really going to try to collect the debt? Tyler told me Marcus owes your company a huge amount of money. The debt is a separate business matter that will be handled through appropriate collection processes. Whether I stayed married to Marcus or not, that debt exists and needs to be addressed according to standard business practices. Good, Vanessa said with evident satisfaction. He needs to face actual consequences for once instead of just moving on to the next situation and leaving destruction behind him. I hope you pursue it aggressively. We talked for a few more minutes before ending the call. Afterward, I sat thinking about patterns and consequences and the ways people like Marcus move through the world creating damage they never had to repair. Vanessa had been damaged. I had been damaged. Presumably there were others in Marcus's past who had also been damaged. The pattern would continue until someone finally imposed costs significant enough to make the behavior untenable. That recognition crystallized my resolve about both the annulment and the debt collection. This was not about vindictiveness or punishment. This was about accountability. This was about ensuring that Marcus finally faced real consequences for dishonest behavior he had apparently been practicing for years. If I accepted a quick compromise on the annulment or wrote off the debt to avoid hassle, I would be enabling the same pattern that had already harmed multiple women. By seeing both matters through to complete resolution regardless of difficulty, I would be drawing a line and saying this behavior was unacceptable and would not go unchallenged. The rest of Monday passed in a blur of meetings and emails and phone calls, the ordinary business of running Luminaire mixed with the extraordinary business of dismantling a marriage and protecting myself legally and financially. By the time I left the office around 7, I was exhausted but also feeling something like satisfaction. I had taken concrete actions to address every major area of concern. Legal representation was secured. Business processes were established. Personal space was reclaimed. Family communications were managed. The overwhelming chaos of Sunday morning had been transformed into a structured action plan with clear next steps and measurable progress. Tuesday brought the first major complication. Michael called around 10 in the morning to inform me that Morrison had filed a response to our annulment petition that included counterclaims I had not anticipated. Marcus was not simply defending against the annulment. He was affirmatively seeking a divorce on grounds that I had acted with malicious intent to harm him professionally and personally, that I had publicly humiliated him without justification, and that I had violated his privacy by accessing confidential financial information without his consent. This is complete nonsense, Michael said, his tone conveying professional irritation. But it is strategically calculated nonsense designed to create leverage. Morrison is trying to establish a narrative where you are the villain who destroyed an innocent man's reputation out of spite or greed. None of it will succeed legally, but it will make the process more expensive and more unpleasant. What do we need to do? I asked, forcing myself to focus on strategy rather than emotional reaction to Marcus's audacity. We file a detailed response demonstrating that every action you took was legally justified and factually supported. We emphasize that you discovered the defaulted loan through legitimate business processes, that Marcus's financial history is a matter of public record, that his previous engagement was concealed through active deception rather than simple omission. We paint a picture of someone who finally discovered they had been systematically deceived and took appropriate protective action. Michael and I spent an hour discussing the response strategy before I had to disconnect for a meeting with a major client who was commissioning an elaborate custom piece for his upcoming proposal. I forced myself to focus completely on the client consultation, asking questions about his relationship and his partner's aesthetic preferences, sketching initial design concepts, discussing stone options and setting styles. For 90 minutes I existed entirely in my professional role, and the escape was therapeutic in its own way. Wednesday brought another development. The collection agency contacted Patricia to report that they had successfully contacted Marcus and his attorney regarding the outstanding debt. Morrison had responded with a letter claiming that the debt was invalid because Marcus had been fraudulently induced into the purchase by Luminaire's financing practices, and that any attempt to collect would be met with counterclaims for damages. The collection agency wanted guidance on how to proceed. Patricia forwarded the correspondence to me with a note saying that Morrison's claims were legally baseless but tactically predictable. Marcus was trying to use the debt as leverage in the annulment proceedings, threatening expensive countersuits if we pursued collection. The strategy was transparent and almost certainly doomed to fail, but it would create hassle and delay and additional legal expenses. I called Jennifer Castellano to discuss the business implications. She reviewed Morrison's letter and dismissed his legal theories as frivolous. This is pure intimidation. Marcus signed a clear contract with standard terms. He made payments for several months, which demonstrates he understood and accepted the terms. There is no fraudulent inducement claim here. Morrison knows that, but he is hoping you will be intimidated enough to back off. I am not backing off, I said firmly. Instruct the collection agency to proceed with standard collection processes, regardless of Morrison's threats. If Marcus wants to file frivolous counterclaims, we will defend against them and seek sanctions for abusive litigation tactics. Jennifer agreed with this approach and promised to coordinate with the collection agency to ensure consistent messaging. The debt collection would proceed on its own timeline independent of the annulment case, making clear that business obligations existed separately from personal relationship issues. Thursday brought the first media coverage. A local blogger who covered society events and celebrity gossip published an article about the wedding disaster with the headline "Jewelry CEO Ends Marriage at Own Reception After Discovering Groom's Secret Debts and Previous Engagement." The article was surprisingly accurate, apparently based on interviews with wedding guests who had witnessed the confrontation. It quoted several anonymous sources describing the scene when Vanessa stood up, and when I removed my wedding ring and left. I read the article with a mixture of dismay and resignation. I had hoped to keep the situation relatively private, but 160 wedding guests made privacy impossible. At least the coverage was factual rather than sensationalized, and the framing presented me as someone who had discovered deception and acted decisively rather than as someone who had overreacted or caused drama. Several friends and professional contacts reached out after seeing the article, offering support and validation. The consensus seemed to be admiration for my willingness to end the marriage immediately rather than trying to make it work despite the deception. The response was more positive than I had anticipated, suggesting that public opinion was generally sympathetic to someone who had been lied to and had responded by refusing to accept that treatment. Friday afternoon brought what felt like a small victory. Michael called to report that the judge assigned to our case had issued temporary orders preventing Marcus from making any claims on my business or personal assets during the annulment proceedings. The order also required both parties to maintain the status quo regarding finances, which effectively prevented Marcus from taking any actions that might dissipate assets or create additional complications. The temporary orders would remain in effect until the annulment was resolved, providing legal protection while the case proceeded. By Friday evening, I was emotionally and physically exhausted, but also cautiously optimistic. The first week had been brutal, but I had survived it. I had established legal representation, protected my business, reclaimed my personal space, and begun the process of systematically addressing every aspect of the situation. Marcus and his attorney were fighting, but I had expected that. The fight would be unpleasant and expensive, but I had resources and determination, and most importantly, I had truth on my side. I spent Friday evening alone in my apartment, which now felt genuinely like mine rather than like a space I shared with someone else. I ordered my favorite Thai food that Marcus had always complained about. I watched a documentary series he had refused to sit through because he found it boring. I took up space in every way I wanted without considering anyone else's preferences or comfort. The solitude felt like freedom rather than loneliness, and that shift in perception felt like meaningful progress toward rebuilding a life that was authentically mine, rather than a compromise designed to accommodate someone else's ego and deception. The following weeks settled into a routine that felt both surreal and grimly productive. I divided my time between running Luminaire, which continued operating successfully despite my personal turmoil, and managing the complex legal proceedings that were consuming increasing amounts of my attention and resources. The annulment case moved forward with the grinding pace characteristic of family law litigation, each procedural step requiring careful preparation and strategic consideration. Michael Torres proved to be exactly the attorney I needed during this period. He combined aggressive advocacy with realistic assessment, never sugarcoating the challenges we faced, but also never suggesting that compromise was inevitable or advisable. We spoke multiple times each week, reviewing discovery requests from Morrison, preparing responses that were thorough without providing unnecessary ammunition, and discussing strategy for the various tactical battles Morrison was waging to delay resolution and increase costs. The discovery process was particularly invasive and exhausting. Morrison had submitted interrogatories, written questions I was required to answer under oath, that probed every aspect of my relationship with Marcus and my business operations. The questions were designed to be maximally intrusive, asking about intimate details of our personal life, my knowledge of Marcus's financial situation at various points during our relationship, my motivations for various decisions, and the specific business processes through which I had discovered the defaulted loan. I spent hours with Michael crafting responses that were truthful and complete, while avoiding language that could be taken out of context or mischaracterized. Each answer required careful consideration of how it might be used against me during deposition or trial. The process was intellectually demanding and emotionally draining, forcing me to relive painful moments and examine my own decision-making with brutal honesty. Morrison also requested extensive document production. He wanted copies of all communications between Marcus and me during our relationship, all financial records related to the engagement ring purchase and subsequent default, all business policies governing Luminaire's financing program, all documents related to my discovery of Marcus's financial problems, and essentially everything that might provide insight into the relationship or the business operations. The document collection alone took dozens of hours, requiring me to search through emails, text messages, photographs, and business records to compile everything responsive to Morrison's requests. Michael reviewed all the documents before production to ensure we were not inadvertently providing information that was privileged or irrelevant to the annulment case. He also carefully documented what we were producing and what we were withholding based on legal privileges, creating a detailed log that would protect us if Morrison later claimed we had failed to provide required materials. Throughout this discovery process, I was struck by how Marcus's strategy revealed his character with perfect clarity. He was not attempting to defend his own conduct or explain his deception in any meaningful way. Instead, he was attacking my credibility and motivations, trying to reframe the narrative so that I became the villain who had unfairly destroyed an innocent man, rather than the victim who had finally discovered years of systematic dishonesty. The approach was consistent with everything I had learned about how Marcus operated. When confronted with his own failures, he deflected blame and attacked the person holding him accountable. During this same period, the debt collection process proceeded on a parallel track. The collection agency reported that Marcus was refusing to engage with their attempts at contact or negotiation. He was not returning calls, not responding to letters, and apparently had instructed Morrison to handle all communications related to the debt. Morrison continued claiming that the debt was invalid and threatening countersuits, but he never actually filed any formal legal action to challenge the debt's validity. The pattern suggested that Marcus recognized his legal position was weak, but hoped that continued resistance and threats would eventually wear down my willingness to pursue collection. I instructed the collection agency to proceed with all available remedies. They reported the delinquent account to credit bureaus, damaging Marcus's already poor credit score. They filed a lawsuit in civil court seeking judgment for the outstanding balance plus interest and collection costs. They prepared to pursue wage garnishment if the judgment was granted and Marcus still refused to pay. Each step increased the pressure on Marcus while demonstrating that Luminaire was treating this default exactly as we would treat any other bad debt, with no special consideration for his personal connection to me. The business implications of the situation gradually became clearer during this period. Initially, I had feared that the scandal would damage Luminaire's reputation, or create problems with customers who might question the company's professionalism or discretion. Those fears proved largely unfounded. Most customers either were unaware of my personal situation, or considered it irrelevant to their decision to work with Luminaire. The company's reputation was built on quality craftsmanship, ethical sourcing, and excellent customer service. My personal life did not significantly impact those factors. In fact, several customers specifically mentioned that they appreciated how I had handled the situation. One couple who had recently gotten engaged came in for a consultation and specifically requested to work with me because, as the woman explained, they admired someone who had the courage to walk away from a dishonest relationship rather than settling for less than they deserved. Her comment stayed with me. A reminder that taking difficult action to protect my integrity had resonated with people who valued those same principles in their own lives. The business also benefited from the clear policies and procedures Patricia and I had established for handling the Marcus situation. By treating the defaulted debt through standard collection processes rather than as a personal matter requiring special handling, we had created a model for managing conflicts of interest that protected both the business and my personal credibility. Other business owners in my professional network reached out to ask how I had navigated the situation, recognizing that conflicts between personal relationships and business obligations were common challenges that required thoughtful management. 6 weeks after the wedding disaster, Michael called to schedule a meeting to prepare for my deposition. Morrison had noticed the deposition for the following month, requiring me to appear and answer questions under oath about everything related to the annulment case. Michael wanted extensive preparation time to ensure I understood what to expect and how to respond effectively. We met at his office on a Saturday morning, clearing several hours for intensive preparation. Michael began by explaining the deposition process and Morrison's likely strategy. The deposition would be conducted at Morrison's office with a court reporter present to create an official transcript. Morrison would ask questions, and I would be required to answer truthfully under oath. Michael would be present to make objections when appropriate, but I would still need to answer most questions even if Michael objected. Morrison's goal during the deposition would be multifaceted. He would try to identify inconsistencies in my story that could be exploited during trial. He would try to provoke emotional responses that would make me appear unstable or vindictive. He would try to establish that I had some knowledge of Marcus's financial problems before the marriage, which would undermine my fraud claim. He would try to suggest that my real motivation for the annulment was facilitating debt collection rather than addressing deception about the marriage itself. Michael explained that effective deposition testimony required a completely different communication style than normal conversation. In regular interaction, people provide context and explanation and try to be helpful and forthcoming. In deposition testimony, those instincts could be dangerous. I needed to answer only the specific question asked without volunteering additional information. I needed to pause before each answer to give Michael time to object if necessary, and to give myself time to formulate a precise response. I needed to avoid speculation or estimation, stating clearly when I did not know something, or could not remember specific details. We spent hours practicing with Michael asking increasingly difficult and confrontational questions, while I practiced maintaining composure and providing disciplined answers. He would ask leading questions designed to get me to agree with characterizations that were technically accurate but misleading in context. He would ask compound questions that bundled multiple inquiries together, requiring me to untangle them and address each component separately. He would interrupt my answers or express skepticism, testing whether I would become defensive or start over-explaining to convince him. The practice was exhausting and occasionally infuriating. Michael deliberately adopted Morrison's aggressive style, pushing me to react emotionally, so we could identify my vulnerabilities and develop strategies for managing them. When I started providing lengthy explanations trying to make him understand my perspective, he stopped me and reminded me that depositions were not opportunities to persuade or educate. They were testimony under oath that would be used against me if I provided ammunition through careless answers. One particularly difficult moment came when Michael asked me directly whether I loved Marcus when I married him. The question was legitimate and would almost certainly come up during the actual deposition, but I found it unexpectedly painful to answer. Did I love Marcus? I had certainly believed I loved him. I had experienced the feelings and thoughts and behaviors associated with love. But had I actually loved the real Marcus, or had I loved the persona he constructed to deceive me? How could love be genuine when it was based on false information about who the other person actually was? Michael watched me struggle with the question and then provided guidance. The legally relevant issue was not whether my feelings constituted some philosophical ideal of love, but whether I would have married Marcus if I had known the truth about his financial situation and previous engagement. My subjective emotional state was less important than whether his deception had been material to my decision to marry him. We practiced that answer multiple times until I could deliver it concisely, and without becoming emotional. Yes, I had feelings for Marcus when I married him. No, I would not have married him if I had known about his extensive financial problems, his pattern of defaulting on debts, and his previous engagement that he had deliberately concealed. The deception was material to my decision, making the marriage fraudulent regardless of whatever feelings I had experienced based on incomplete and false information. By the end of that Saturday session, I felt better prepared but also more anxious about the deposition. Michael's aggressive questioning had given me a preview of what Morrison would attempt, and it was going to be unpleasant. But I also felt more confident in my ability to handle difficult questions without damaging my case. The preparation had transformed the deposition from a vague threat into a specific challenge with known parameters and practice responses. The following weeks brought continued discovery battles and case management hearings where Michael and Morrison argued about procedural issues before the judge. Morrison was employing every delay tactic available, seeking extensions of deadlines, requesting additional discovery, and filing motions on tangential issues that required responses and hearings. Each action slowed the case's progress and increased legal costs. Michael estimated that we were spending approximately $15,000 per month in attorney fees and litigation costs, with no end in sight. I authorized the expenses without hesitation despite their significant impact on my personal finances. The costs were painful but necessary. Allowing Marcus and Morrison to use expense as leverage would send the wrong message and encourage continued obstruction. I needed to demonstrate that I had both the resources and the determination to see this through regardless of how expensive or unpleasant Morrison made the process. During this same period, I began attending a support group for people navigating high-conflict divorces and annulments. My therapist had recommended the group, suggesting that connecting with others facing similar challenges might help me process the experience and maintain perspective during the difficult legal battle. I was initially resistant, uncomfortable with the idea of sharing intimate details of my situation with strangers, but I recognized that my support network, while loving and well-intentioned, could not fully understand what I was experiencing because they had not been through similar situations. The support group met weekly in the community room of a local library. The facilitator was a licensed therapist who specialized in helping people manage the emotional and practical challenges of ending difficult relationships. The group included approximately 12 regular participants ranging in age from late 20s to early 60s, all navigating various stages of divorce or annulment proceedings with varying degrees of conflict and complexity. My first meeting was uncomfortable. We went around the circle introducing ourselves and briefly describing our situations. When my turn came, I provided a condensed version focusing on the essential facts. I had discovered my husband's extensive deception almost immediately after our wedding. I was seeking annulment based on fraud. He was contesting it and making the process as difficult as possible. Several people nodded with expressions of recognition and sympathy, silently communicating that they understood exactly what I meant even from that brief summary. Over subsequent weeks, I found the group increasingly valuable. The other participants shared strategies for managing difficult legal processes, recommended attorneys and experts, and provided perspective on what to expect at various stages of litigation. More importantly, they offered validation that I was not overreacting or being unreasonable. Many of them had faced similar accusations from their former partners or from mutual friends who thought they should be more accommodating or willing to compromise. Hearing others articulate the same frustrations and doubts I was experiencing helped me recognize that my responses were normal reactions to abnormal circumstances, rather than evidence of some personal failing. One woman in the group, Laura, had a situation with striking parallels to mine. Her husband had concealed massive gambling debts throughout their marriage, continuing to gamble and accumulate additional debt, while lying about his activities and finances. When Laura finally discovered the truth and filed for divorce, her husband claimed that she was abandoning him during a mental health crisis, and that his gambling was an illness deserving of compassion, rather than grounds for ending the marriage. The similarities to Marcus's strategy of deflecting responsibility and recasting himself as the victim were remarkable. Laura shared that her divorce had taken nearly 2 years to finalize because her husband and his attorney had employed every possible delay tactic. The legal fees had exceeded $60,000. The emotional toll had been significant, but she also said that refusing to compromise on the divorce terms or accept any responsibility for her husband's debt had been absolutely the right decision. She now had complete financial separation, legal protection from his future financial disasters, and the satisfaction of knowing she had held firm on principles that mattered to her even when the process became extremely difficult. Her story was both cautionary and encouraging. The battle I was fighting might be long and expensive and emotionally exhausting, but it was possible to get through it with integrity intact and life rebuilt. Other people had faced similar challenges and had emerged on the other side stronger and more certain of their own judgment and values. As the deposition date approached, I increased my preparation intensity. Michael and I met multiple times for practice sessions where he would spend hours asking difficult questions in Morrison's anticipated aggressive style. I practiced maintaining neutral facial expressions and tone of voice regardless of how provocative the questions became. I practiced the discipline of pausing before answering to think carefully about the precise question being asked. I practiced saying "I do not recall" or "I do not know" when those were accurate answers rather than speculating or estimating to appear more helpful or certain. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.